Good morning, Salome V here, and today we're going to talk about the history of immigration law in the United States, or the U.S. Let's talk about it. The Immigration Act of 1903 is called the Anarchist Exclusion Act. This regulated immigration. The law barred a class called undesirable or inadmissible class, anarchists, and it named anarchists slash, well, they don't call them anarchists anymore. They're terrorists today, mentally ill or people with epilepsy, beggars, and importers of prostitutes, including child prostitution. Anarchism came to public attention in the United States with the Haymarket Affair of 1886. On May 4th, a policeman was killed and several others were wounded. And after a bomb exploded in Chicago, Haymarket Square, 8 members from the IWP, International Working People Association, were found guilty of bombing. 1889, the Congress had a congressional hearing mentioning the bill. July 20th, 1894, Congress sought to restrict any anarchist. So Leon F. Gonzalez, an American-born son of a Polish immigrant, self-proclaimed anarchist, assassinated President William McKinley. Police arrested a number of anarchists. One by the name of Emma Goldman, who was a communist. She found the Free Society, the leading English language communist anarchist periodical in the U.S. at that time. President Roosevelt urged the exclusion and deportation of anarchists. Immigrants, December 3rd, 1901, he addressed it. So let's talk about this first one. So when the United States presidents and Congress were met with a problem with a bunch of anarchists getting into the country, they started to exclude people who were prostitutes, anarchists, mentally insane, and people that were importers and people that were coming here to work as prostitutes. Okay? So that was the first rules made for immigration. So let's keep walking down memory lane of immigration. Okay? The Immigration Act of 1917, which was called the Literacy Act, also known as the Asiatic Bar Zone Act. Most sweeping act, the act supported nativism. And nativism is the political policy of promoting the interests of native inhabitants today. They are also called patriots today, but they don't use the word nativism anymore or natives anymore. It's called patriots now. So when you think about the Patriot Act, think about nativism. Now this is the Literacy for Immigrants Act of 1917. Head taxes were levied on immigrants to offset the care if they became poor. Immigration Act of 1882, certain classes were restricted. Criminals, the insane, or persons unable to take care of themselves. This is the first act of immigration. So the first act of immigration of 1882, it did not allow criminals, illiterates, and people who could not take care of themselves. So the Immigration Act was never racist. It was just about certain people who could come into America and who could not. Okay, so the first act was the Page Act of 1875, which restricted the immigration of forced laborers coming from Asia. This had a major offset on Asia immigration of Asia indentured workers and women, especially Asian women, coming to work for prostitution. Second was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. The act halted all legal immigration of Chinese laborers. This is the first exclusionary immigration exclusion. Chinese and Asian immigrants were called the Great Wave. Emergency Quota Act of 1921. This is the act of on immigration, restricted a percentage of people, and it was called the Johnson Quota Act, May 19, 1921, restricted immigration into the United States. Now let's see how they did this in 1921. All right. The Emergency Quota Act restricted the number of immigrants from any country annually 3% of the number of residents from the same country living in the United States. As of the U.S. Census of 1910, people from Northern European countries had a higher quota and were more likely to be admitted to the U.S. than people from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe or other non-European countries. Professionals were to be admitted without regard to their country of origin. The act set no limitation on immigration from Latin America. The act did not apply to countries with bilateral agreements with this. So Asian countries listed in the Immigration Act of 1917. The Immigration Act of 1924 reduced the quota to 2%. The census of 1890, when the population was from regions regarded as less desirable based on the formula, immigrants admitted fell from 805,222 in 1920 to 309,556. So it reduced to 309,556 1921 to 1922. The average annual flow of immigrants prior to 1921 was 175,983 from North and Western Europe and 685,531 from other countries, principally Southern and Eastern Europe. 1921 immigration levels changed drastically. There was an increase of immigration following the World War I, the Russian Revolution, and the Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire led to great immigration of European countries. 7. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, Public Law 89, 236, 79, Stat 911, June 30th, 1968, known as the Hart-Celler Act, changed the quotas allocated and abolished the quota system. They said the Quota Act was discrimination on the non-Northern European immigrants or people coming in. The so-called discrimination barriers. This would alter the demographic mix in the U.S. Okay, so those are the specific changes in immigration down through the years. And immigration was based on who could come in the country based on their mental state, their profession, And no prostitutes, no anarchists or terrorists, no prostitutes, and no illiterates, and no beggars. That's what the Immigration Act is based upon. Undesirables. Not having people here who cannot take care of themselves. Only professionals were admitted into the United States with no problem, no matter where they were from, whether they were black, Chinese, or whatever. If they were professionals, they could come in with no problem, no matter where they came from. They could come here to work or come here to better themselves. So this is the various acts of the immigration law, and it has changed over the years since the 1800s. So what I've said, or all of these things that I've came across in history, basically this what happened. After reading all of that, I'm going to give you the simple what has happened. When the 1965 Immigration Act, the Bar Act, or the act that they call discriminatory. So this act, 1965, changed everything. It said that, they was going to get rid of the quotas. The quota is basically the Bar Act of not allowing certain people into the country. They got rid of that. So when they got rid of that, there was already an overflow of Latin Americans here, because Latin America, they could come in here. They were not restricted of coming to America. This is why we have an overflow of them. They were never restricted because all of the immigration acts excluded Latin America, because Latin America had bilateral contracts with America. So this excluded anyone from Latin America or South America. So this is why you have an overflow or influx of Mexicans or South Americans. You have an overflow of them because they were never restricted from coming here. So with the Immigration Act, the large immigration was of European people from Northern European and Northern European people came here. So this is why you had a big influx of whites here, and non-Europeans from South and Western Europe could not come here because that was dealing with the Asian issues where prostitutes were coming here. People from Asia and China were coming here, and they were indentured workers. And the United States wanted to stop that problem, so they excluded anyone from Asia and China coming in here. So that left the door open for Mexicans and whites to come in here and populate America. And this is why we have a Mexican issue. This is why we have a South America issue where we have a lot of illegal immigrants coming in. And then when they got rid of the quota system in 1965, they allowed all of the criminals and the beggars and all of the people that the previous acts stopped from coming in here. They allowed them to come in here because they claimed that that was discrimination. So they have opened the door for anarchists, prostitutes, beggars, child importers. They have just broken the system by getting rid of the quota system. If they go back to the quota system, which Donald Trump was saying not to allow certain immigrants from certain parts of the country that have terrorism in it, don't allow those countries to come in here. That's the quota system. So Donald Trump did not create no new law. He didn't make no new law. He just wanted to go back to the quota system, which was abolished in 1965. And since that was abolished, they opened the door to evil, letting all kinds of undesirables in here. So that is the history of immigration. Like, share, subscribe. Salome B. Have a great day. All right, so I'm back. Well, Donald Trump is now trying to change the narrative of the media. The media has put out the pictures of the little baby that's crying on the Time magazine. Come to find out, the father says that the baby was never separated from his mother, so the picture is fake. It's been used to garner emotions so these illegals can come in or continue to come in. The Mexican immigrants that are coming in here, 50,000 at a time a month, they have never been excluded from coming in America. Never. According to the immigration history that I just went over with you, they were never excluded because anybody that had a bilateral contracts were excluded from immigration bars. So the Mexicans have been getting away with being here illegally, and immigration did not harm them because they had bilateral agreements. So all of this stuff that we're seeing with immigration, they're talking about immigration separation and all that. Well, Donald Trump is saying, what about the families who were permanently separated from their families after being killed by illegal immigrants being here? That's another side of the argument that nobody is looking at. See, on my channel, I deal with truth. If you're not dealing with both sides of the story, you're not dealing with truth. Donald Trump brought the second part of the argument. What about those who've been killed by illegal immigrants and they come here and they're allowed to stay and they kill somebody, they're not deported? He had a rally and he had families come up on stage talking about how they're permanently separated from their families who were killed by illegal criminal immigrants. And the 1965 Act, the Quota Act that they discontinued, this allowed criminals to come in because they claimed that this act was discriminatory against non-Europeans. And what happened was they opened the door for beggars, criminals, prostitutes, mentally ill. So now Mexico can send all its mentally ill over here, or all its criminals, like they did in 1940s when Chavez kicked out all of the criminals and they came to America and they poured into Florida's port, and George W. Bush had to deal with that. George W. Bush Sr. had to deal with that, and all of the drugs that poured into Florida and Miami docks. This is what happened when you have politicians who don't look at the past law and they come in and say, oh, well, this is discriminatory, and they don't understand that they just opened the floodgates to allowing beggars, criminals, anarchists, terrorists, and everything else into the country. I don't know what to say about these politicians, but they are not looking at the laws that have been laid down since the 1800s, and then they're putting new law on the books, and that's conflicting with the old law. It's just crazy. It's crazy. It's insane, and I don't understand what they call themselves doing. But I want you to walk away with today that the Mexicans were never excluded from coming into the country. They've been able to come in the country free without even being charged because they have a bilateral contract with the United States. So they are excluded from being barred by immigration. So they went untouched for years. They didn't have any problems being here because the Immigration Act excluded them. So now that Trump is trying to go back to the old way, Republican way, which is you have to be able to read when you come in here. You got to be a professional if you want to come here. It doesn't matter where you're from, as long as you're a professional and you're coming to raise a family and you're coming here to follow the laws. Not come here, break the law, be a prostitute, be an anarchist, be a beggar, or be mentally ill, or be indignant, or can't read. These are the people that are excluded. They were called undesirables. That's the Immigration Act. The Immigration Act is based on restricting undesirables into the country. Salon B, like, share, subscribe. Have a great day.